Good evening and welcome to Metro East Community Media here in Gresham, Oregon. And we're going to be doing one episode of the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. I'm John Knotts, and I'm here with retired Master Sergeant, United States Air Force, Mr. Frank Martin. And I have one question for you, Frank. The very first one. I see 22 years, 8 months, and 14 days, but you weren't counting. But I know you were counting.
Yeah, well, you got to count a little bit, but I actually enjoyed my job, and I kind of wanted to stay in a little while longer, but the Air Force didn't let me.
Why?
They deleted the career field, got rid of it.
Okay, that brings me to another question. What career field did you have? We call MOS.
Now, for the Air Force, it's called Air Force Specialty, and I was initially a 23-1 graphics specialist, which later morphed into what they call a 3VO ETS-1 graphics specialist. And I was part of the audiovisual or multimedia career group. And I was basically a graphic design artist that would make charts, graphs, briefings, posters, unit logos when needed, technical report covers, just anything a graphic artist could do to support the mission, they'd have me do it. Mm-hmm. But meaning I was under the multimedia career group, we'd also work with the photographers and videographers, so there was a lot of cross-utilization all through the job.
And you worked with evaluation teams?
Worked with evaluation teams at Brooks Air Force Base under the U.S. School of Aerospace Medicine, yes.
Aerospace medicine. Now, what did you get involved in that?
That was my first duty assignment after technical training, and that was the medical illustration section of that organization. And USAF-SAM was a medical research unit they did in-depth evaluations of all kinds of things. There was a laser laboratory that did experiments on lasers. There was a hyperbaric medicine chamber. There was a research on epidemiology for diseases and gases and all that. Bioenvironmental teams that would actually go out and evaluate areas for hazardous materials for the military. And all that time, they would actually develop things like back when I was first there was a thing called Combat Edge. Combat Edge was the helmet that they now have pilots wear to put computer images and HUD on top of the helmet. Mm-hmm. So, that kind of research all through 5 years of being there.
I don't think a lot of people are aware of graphics, graphic design in the military, but it's quite an extensive field.
Yes.
Everything that's done in the military, there's a poster, a sign, some artwork done in the field of advertising, but that led you into photography. Videography.
Well, that's because, photography and videography, they were both under our career group, and we would have to work with those people. Well, that also meant cross-utilization. If the photographers were busy doing a photography job and I needed a roll of slide film done for my briefings that I would put on slide film, because we used to do them on the computer, and then sometimes we'd send it to a film recorder to make a 35 millimeter slide, and then we'd have to develop it. Well, if the photographer's gone and can't develop the film, who's going to do it? Mm-hmm. So they taught me how to roll film and do my own developing. But because of that, they would also say, well, if you're going to do that, you can also help us take pictures. So go and take pictures. Here, we need this go take this picture. And another thing the military used to do is, and officers, they would have to have their photos taken and put in their records for their promotions. So we would actually have the officers come in and we'd take studio shots of them.
So when you initially went into the Air Force, and you had to be taking tests, what qualified you for these specialty areas?
I don't know, because I scored higher on the mechanical and the electronics than I did my general, and the job they gave me was a general career field.
It's interesting in the military how job assignments occur coming in from the civilian world
Right.
and ending up in an area that you never figured that you'd be in. But what I wanted to ask you was about the New Jersey evaluation, investigation on New Jersey, and maybe the Iowa, USS Iowa.
Well, the USS Iowa back in 1987 had a little incident happen on B turret where a shell blew up in the number 3 gun. And the Navy had 3 other battleships. So there was an investigation automatically started on what's going on a battleship. Well, the Navy only had 2 teams to go out to the Wisconsin and the Missouri. Well, the New Jersey was in the Gulf of Mexico, which was close to where we were. So the Navy actually went to the Air Force and said, well, you got a unit at Texas, could you help us? That team was assigned, and I got to be the lucky dude to grab a camera and go with that team.
So you got to the Iowa.
We flew out to the Iowa, and we actually went all over the ship, and I followed the bioenvironmental engineers and 2 colonels and a major and a captain, taking these test samples on the ship, and I take photos of what they were doing.
So not only the cross-utilization from department to department within the military, but cross-utilization from one military
Yes.
to another field of endeavor.
I have worked for every branch of the service in the military.
Quite an extensive career.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me about being at Brooks Air Force Base?
Well, like I said, that was my first base, and they assigned me to the medical illustration section. I was an Airman Basic, E1, no stripe on my sleeve when I got there. When I was in tech school, they told us we weren't going to be using computers to do graphics for at least 10 years if you stayed in. 3 days after I got there, I was sitting on a computer doing graphics on a computer. Besides doing the manual graphics that they trained us in tech school to do. And I worked with 7 fantastic civilians and 5 or 6 really good military. And that's where I really learned how to do the job. And it's because of me working there that caused me to make the Air Force my career. I really enjoyed working there. I enjoyed who I was working with. Learned all kinds of interesting stuff, what the Air Force was doing, what they were developing. That when it came time to re-enlist 4 years later, I just said, I'll just continue on, and that's what I did.
So let me backtrack. How did you decide on the Air Force?
Back in the 80s, I wanted to work on the railroad. Unfortunately, the economy wasn't that good.
And that was where?
Hermiston, Oregon. My dad was a machinist on the railroad, and he retired before I graduated, and I wanted to be part of the railroad. Unfortunately, they weren't hiring. So I was looking at what I could do. And I found the Air Force had a job, railway equipment specialist. So I tried to join the Air Force doing that. And that was the job they gave me when I got to the enlistment office. When I got to basic training in 1984 on December 28th, and about 4 days later, I went to this office and they told me, that job is going away. Pick from this list. So I picked from a list of about 9 or 10 jobs. Graphic specialist was not part of it, but lo and behold, that's what they gave me. It was later explained to me that they looked at my school records and found out that I had high school drafting in it, and that's what they plugged me into the job, even though drafting had nothing to do with my job.
I think that's the interesting thing about the military is you may end up in a career, you go into boot camp, you really don't have any idea what you want to do. So let me assume that you didn't know what you wanted to do. You had an idea you wanted to get involved in the railway. That was done away with.
Yep.
So you went to boot camp where? Tell me something about boot camp.
Okay. Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas, is where all the enlisted do their basic training. And I got down there on December 28th of 84, and 12:30 in the morning, 95 degrees when we got there. It was hot. And they didn't wake us. They told us we were going to sleep in. Well, sleeping into them meant we got up at 8 instead of 6:30. And because I got there so close to New Year's, we didn't get put into uniforms until I was there 8 days. And between that time, they'd sent me to that office where, pick the jobs. Well, the one job I picked was airborne comm system operator, where you're supposed to be on a plane operating the radios on electronic warfare aircraft. And they told me I had that job. That's what I thought I was going to do. Then when they sent me back in the office to sign the contract, that job wasn't there. Graphic specialist is what I got. That's what I started working on. But all in all, I think it was a fair trade because that's what really caused me to stay in. I enjoyed the job.
I would think that any experience you picked up in others, I would refer to MOSs or military careers, would help when you got into graphic design or into videography.
Right.
To have experience on an aircraft, to have a general knowledge of vehicles and base operation. So all that comes into play.
Right. But now, like I was in the Air Force. Well, my first base had no aircraft. We had an old runway out there with some F-105s that were being used for training how to repair combat damage, but not a single plane flew out of my base. So I thought that was unusual in the first place.
I would find that unusual.
It wasn't until 5 years later when I got assigned to Osan Air Base after Brooks that I was on a base that actually had aircraft on it.
And you were at the graphic shop there.
Right.
And you also serviced Suwon.
Suwon Air Base to the north of us that had A-10s. And Suwon is the Korean base where they train their enlisted also. So we would actually do work for the 28th Wing up there, 29th Wing up there for the A-10s. And then every once in a while we get jobs from their Korean office that they would do deals with our people and then they would send it down to us. And we had a Korean civilian that helped us out with that.
So again, we're back to the cross utilization, and a lot of careers in all of the militaries seem to cross paths quite a bit because you had experience with the Navy and Army.
And the Army. We get jobs from Camp Humphreys and Camp Red Cloud up towards the DMZ. And one time I even got sent up to Camp Liberty Bell, which was right along the DMZ, where we take pictures of the Army people walking the fence line. But 1990, that was the last of it. That job went to the Koreans.
Do they still consider that combat zone or not?
Yes.
They do?
The war has never ended in Korea.
I didn't think so. I bet a lot of people are unaware of that.
And when I was marching along with our little Army unit at night, I couldn't take any pictures at the time because it was dark. We were actually walking on, we actually heard mortar fire. It was away from us. It was Koreans firing on Koreans, but the war's never ended there. And I don't ever see it ending there myself.
So during exercise, you start a Desert Storm. Tell me something about that.
Okay. During the 7th Air Force commander on that base is a 3-star general, or was when I was there. And his job was to run all the aircraft for the UN forces in Korea. And they would actually require a graphics specialist or somebody to do the briefing for him in the morning. So I got sent up there with a little suitcase with a manual set of pens, and I would make briefing overhead slides for him in English. And they would give me the stuff to put on the slide, and I'd do it and hand it to a Korean civilian, and he'd put the Korean on it. And then I would be required to stay in the office while that briefing was going on and watch it through closed-circuit television. Essentially, I would be pulled out of my office. My tech sergeant, who was my supervisor, was no longer my supervisor. My supervisor was a 3-star general. And his deputy, which was also a 3-star Korean general, was my assistant supervisor. It was interesting work.
So you got your request from the commander of all the air forces in Korea, but they were under the United Nations command system.
Right. And that's how it's all worked out. The United Nations actually controlled the forces in Korea, even during the war. It just continues to this day. So when you hear people talk about, I don't want our troops to be under UN command. Well, if they go to Korea, in a small way, they are under UN command, but it's usually run by an Air Force 3-star or a 4-star. For the Army, it's a 4-star.
Now, to go back to something that you'd mentioned earlier, is the DMZ still being considered combat zone,
Right.
war zone, if you will?
War zone.
How did that affect any deployment to Desert Shield or Desert Storm?
We didn't go.
And why not?
Only one unit left Osan to go to Desert Shield or Desert Storm, and that was the 5th Combat Air Control Squadron. The rest of us, we stayed in Korea, and we were told, you're in the other war zone. Now, we didn't get hazardous duty pay. We got overseas pay, but we were considered in a wartime area vital to maintain forces.
So they do distinguish between combat pay and hazardous duty pay.
Yes.
And if you're married, you have separation pay and,
Right.
and different things along that line. A lot of similarities to when I was in, and I found that in Vietnam in 1967, the generation apart from yourself. We got combat pay.
Right.
Folks who came in for 48 or 72 hours in the Air Force or Navy, and they'd fly in for a day or two, and they had, if they were married, separation pay and combat pay and hazardous duty pay, and they were lined up with all this pay, and we're sitting there as young Marines wondering, well, what about us? Isn't it just oh, that's a permanent duty station, so you don't qualify. You just get combat pay.
Now, fast forward to Iraqi freedom. I spent some time over in the desert in Qatar in 2004, and all my pay was tax-free, and I got combat pay.
Oh, okay.
So, things change. It all depends on how the status of forces agreement is written, how they consider it. In Qatar, 6 months. It's supposed to be there 3 months. Of course, that never worked out, and so we were there for 6 months. And that was a little bit different situation. We were in Qatar, which is Qatar, is how it looks on the map. And the planes would fly out of our base and then go over Iraq and drop bombs and then come back. The only time I considered myself unsafe there was they had a RPG missile or rocket propelled grenade land in a base 5 miles away from me. That wasn't going to bother me any, but the other time later on, I got aboard an AC-130 and had to take pictures of them flying around, and we were shot at. Now, it didn't matter. They were shooting AK-47s at us, so they couldn't hit us. We could fire back. And that's what they did later on. But that was the closest I ever came to real combat.
Let me go back to Vietnam and the old Goonie Bird, Puff the Magic Dragon. It was disbanded, I understand. I didn't know that until years later, but I was at Offutt Air Force Base for a great air show a number of years ago, and I saw the AC-130, the new unit. Tell me about that.
Now, an AC-130 is a 4-engine cargo aircraft that replaced the AC-47. And instead has two 20-millimeter Gatling guns on the side of it. It's got two 40-millimeter Bofor guns on the side of it, and it's got one 105-millimeter howitzer. 105,
I remember, yeah.
And when that gun goes off, the plane moves over 5 feet in the air. But that's the replacement for that AC-47 that had 7.62 miniguns in it.
So to double up on the miniguns, and I believe the one I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, had the 105.
Yep.
But it also had automatic M79.
Not ours. Not the one I was in. They have later refined a lot of those models. I mean, I was aboard what they called a U model. There's H models, there's G models, there's different brands of it. And what I found kind of interesting when I was aboard that aircraft was the gunners are just feeding the guns. Mm-hmm. The person actually shooting the gun is the pilot.
It's all automated.
Yeah, he's got a little gun sight like this, and the weapons warfare officer tells him, yeah, your guns are lined up, and he takes a look at this little sight, and he presses the button, and boom, 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 boom. But how that all came about, we were flying around. It was 8 hours of boredom. there was nothing for me to take photos of. You know, they weren't doing anything. Nobody was calling us for support. And suddenly we heard a forward air controller come on the line, and he said, well, you know, there's two guys on top of the building firing AK-47s at you. The pilot came back and said, well, we're at 18,000 feet. I'm not worried. And then forward air controller goes, well, I just thought to let you know. And all of a sudden the plane started dipping. You heard the announcement over the intercom, we're going to test our guns. That's all I heard. And all of a sudden, you know, the gunners, they sort of got ammunition clips ready. I can tell you right now, the building that those guys were standing on was gone. Now, whether they got hit, I can't tell you. Don't know, don't care. But the building was gone.
The firepower is phenomenal. I know watching, especially at night with the tracers on just a Gatling gun.
Right.
Single Gatling gun off a Goonie Bird. And every fourth, fifth, sixth round is a tracer.
Yeah.
And it was a solid red line to the ground at night, like a red pencil line. Tell me, were you on it when they fired?
Yes, I couldn't see no tracers. All I was seeing is ammunition loaders. That was it. You would have to be in the cockpit or with the weapons control officer looking through the television camera out the side to be able to see what you were doing.
But to tether that aircraft in a turn, left-hand turn,
Yeah, pilot just
and just pinpoint
it.
everything to one location.
One location.
Devastating.
Yep.
Because one Gatling gun's a terrible
And
football
on
field.
in our run, I think they went through. I think I counted 40 millimeter shells. They shot off the 20 millimeter for like 30 seconds, and then 5 105 rounds.
And all the brass stays in the aircraft.
And all the brass stays in the air. Well, no, the 20 millimeter stuff that was being thrown over the side, but the shells from the 105, they just put it in a little empty bin. That was it.
Never heard of any civilians being hit in the head with an empty cartridge or.
No, I haven't. Now, when I was leaving the base, they had an Australian C-130 going up to a base. Well, when they took off, they got shot at, and one of the crewmen got killed. So before I left the base, I heard of somebody on a C-130 get hit. Now, I didn't know the person, but, you know, it kind of made you think, you know, because they delayed our flight taking off because we had to wait for that C-130 to come back on the... They thought he was going to survive, but by the time he landed on the tarmac, he was dead.
Well, C-130 is a substantial aircraft. It has been for years. It's still being used heavily.
Yes.
Transport. I know they were bringing supplies in, medevacs out in Vietnam, food in, and they get hit, and they were pretty airworthy.
Yep.
I know there was one that went down at Khe Sanh just after I left there. My unit recon tried to get the crew out of it, burned on the strip there. Was quite devastating.
Yep.
And the one coming in behind it took a mortar round in the right main gear coming up through it, and they were able to get out. But it's been a substantial aircraft.
Right.
So tell me about the aircraft during your time in the military that you became familiar with, had the privilege of being around.
Well, when I got assigned to Hill Air Force Base after I left Pittsburgh, worked in a maintenance training unit. So I got kind of familiar with B-52, F-15, F-16, and KC-135s. And the reason for that is the unit I was working in, I was making graphics for computer-based training for flight line maintenance. Mm-hmm. And we'd actually go to the site, and they would give me a video camera to help record some of those stuff, or a digital camera to take pictures so I could draw other pictures to make the computer-based training. And learn the ins and outs of repairing aircraft. And the one I distinctly remember is I had to work on the F-15 fuel cell program. And by the time they got done, I worked with that team so much that they'd actually use me to give me the program. I don't know anything about an aircraft. I know they take off. But they made me take the F-15 fuel cell servicing course. Went through it 5 times, tried to break the program, found 2 errors, and then they'd fix it and then make me do it again. Then when they got done, they got curious of what I would remember. So they took me up onto the base. We had a visiting F-15. Lo and behold, they had me do fuel cell servicing. And I was told I did pretty good. I had a B is what they gave me when I got done. And it was kind of interesting work.
So tell me about the Australian Air Force, your experience with them.
That was when I was at
Singapore and the French, should I say the French Navy?
the French Navy. That was when I was at Qatar. We were part of the 379th Air Expeditionary Wing. And when you got there, you had the Royal Air Force. You had the Australian Air Force. They were there with F-18s. The Royal Air Force was there. They had tornadoes when I got there, but by the time I really got to work in there, the tornadoes took off. But they were still there, and we would still service their people. And that was like it was an allied thing. So Australians would come in, can you do this? And yeah, sure. And one of the things they had me work on is they have a thing called Anzac Day. It's kind of like our Veterans Day. It's a celebration of the Anzac forces during World War I. They had quite a program, so I ended up doing posters and all kinds of little briefing slides and all that for getting ready for Anzac Day. But it actually made good things because I got invited to their mess, which meant I can get. Once I went to their mess, the restrictions the DOD gave me were wiped out because I was on Australian territory. Kind of interesting.
Department of Defense.
Department of Defense, yeah.
Haven't heard the term DOD.
And then the Singaporeans, they were there, and they showed up, and we would have to service them. And that was really hard because they would actually give me a font to put in the computer to type in some of the words that wouldn't translate to English. So they would give me the job, and then I'd have to type it in, and then I would have to call one of their people over to say, okay, is this done right? And they were interesting to talk to me. Now, the French Navy were there to support the Combined Forces Command Commander there. And there was a French admiral, so every once in a while we get a job from the French admiral. But I was there for 6 months, like I said, and I was only supposed to be there for 3. Well, 2 months into the tour there, the French pulled out. They had a disagreement with George W. Bush, and they left. So, coming and going. You worked for all kinds of people. The only people we didn't work for on that base was the Qatari Air Force. And the base belongs to the Qataris.
That brings up another question. I always referred to it as Qatar in the old movies from years ago, and Lawrence of Arabia area, and Qatar, and all of a sudden I start hearing Qatar.
That's how they pronounce it. That's how they pronounce their country, Qatar. That's what it's really called.
Qatar. It's interesting. You know what I find interesting too is that going back to 1984 and being in the airline business a couple of times, computers really weren't being used then.
No.
We didn't have computers. I was pleased to get a fax machine, an electric typewriter I learned to work on. So as the technology has evolved, you went through a lot of transitions.
I went through a lot. When I first got there, we had these old terminals, and it went to a mainframe computer. There was a graphics program on there, and they actually sent me to a class to run it. And I actually did briefings on that old mainframe computer. The problem with that was I had to share time with the researchers. So a research project would actually knock my graphics job out. Even if they were giving me the job to give a report on their research project, I couldn't make the graphics for them on that program because their research time on their computer would knock me off the queue. Then they gave me a Macintosh, and they put it on my desk and gave me a job to do, and I got out my ink pens and got ready to do it. And you guys can put the first picture up there, and it can show what the ink pens look like. I was told, do it on the Macintosh. And I said, well, I don't even know how to plug that thing in. And my supervisor at the time was a kind of an interesting buck sergeant. And he looked at me and he goes, learn. He get a little reprimand and walked off. So that's what I did. And then by the time I left that base, the first base, the other.
There you are.
That's me.
Right there, a young man. How old were you?
I was, on that picture, I was about 20 years old. I'd just gotten done with that sign. I hand painted that one. And that took me 8 days to do. And they were so proud, they put me in front of the photo and here, take a picture of it. And
It's great history. It's great memories.
And that was when I was in Germany and I was learning how to roll film so I could do a better job in the photo lab.
You just struck on something, a thought that I had as having spent years in the film industry, movie industry, and I watched the technology change. The cutting film, cutting audio tape,
Right.
taping it together, rather archaic, but the only way it was done.
Yeah.
So you actually came in, there was film still being used.
Oh, we used to have film librarians doing the cutting and splicing of motion picture film all the time.
Which folks today in the business
Right.
wouldn't have an idea how that happens, how easy it is to run the reels back and forth and listen, the audio technique.
When I left Germany, I went to Hill Air Force Base and I was doing that computer-based training stuff, and then they moved me in the video production house. And we would take motion picture film and actually convert it to video
Yes.
and do it all in video. And that's where I really learned my skills to work here at Metro East. So when I started working here, it was the old analog system. Well, it was exactly like I had at Hill. I never bothered to take the class until they brought in this high definition video stuff in here. Because it was the same.
Well, you had to step up on me because having worked in the business and watched the editing of both audio and video, or film as it were, pretty simple. Razor blade.
Yep. Splice it. Put the
I didn't
tape
have the
in there.
computer experience that you have. So the hurdle I have to jump over is with a new computer, all the technology that now we're dealing with. So you've gone through those steps that a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to touch bases with.
And that's how I get so comfortable with some of the new equipment comes in. That's like this old system, and then I just sort of learn the nuances and go from there. And I'll admit it, I value the time I had in the military. In fact, every office I was in, because of being involved with the computers, the computers, you run them. Mm-hmm. And when I got those Macintoshes in my first base, we'd have customers come in. They were like you. They never touched a computer in life. They'd look at the computer, they'd turn away. It'd be like it was threatening their lives. Now I can't imagine being without a computer. And it got to the point where we're at Hill or Ellsworth, power would go out. Well, now what are we going to do? Couldn't do anything. All the photography was digital. All the video is basically digital. Graphics, the power is not on. I can't print it.
I think that's part of technology that people haven't gotten in touch with, is when the power is down, the world stops.
Yeah.
The world literally stops. People don't have a backup plan. They don't have a plan B.
Now, because of my first base, I worked for a period of time with old type equipment. So sometimes when the power would go out, I go old school. I actually made a poster one time with the ink pens at Ellsworth. And my troops thought I was nuts. They go, well, we got to get the status board done. Well, we can't, Sergeant Martin. The power's out. And they're not going to give it back to us for 8 hours. I'll have the board done by the end of the day. You guys go home. And I had the board done by the end of the day. I used our markers and a T-square and did it all lonesome. And then I waited till the next day to put the lettering on. I did it all on computer. But yeah, you're right. Nowadays, if power goes out, basically you're stuck. And even in personnel, when I first got in, everything was done with little files, little folders. Now it's all on a computer.
I remember a computer my first year at college back in the 60s, and we were programming these large cards with the X's and the O's and whatever was on there, and the computer was the size of the building.
The big stacks.
And I thought, This is idiotic, this is not, I didn't want anything to do with that. But now to see how it's evolved, that people are making movies with cell phones.
That's right. Exactly
They're
right.
working out of their basements. Are you kidding me? The access that folks have in combat zones that we didn't have.
And see, that's my job. When I first came in, I couldn't understand how the job really related to anything. But then it was explained to me that audiovisual / multimedia, our job was to document what was going on in the Air Force. And when I got put into my overseas job in Osan in Germany, I was part of combat camera squadrons. Well, what does combat camera do? Well, we document what's going on. But that all came to an end in 2007 when they decided to take the photo and video people and put them under public affairs. And then graphics was declared surplus. Don't need those anymore. So I kept getting asked before I retired, because I just said, I'll retire. It's almost 23 years. Time to go. Well, what am I going to do? Who's going to make this for me? Well, the commander's got a choice. He can go off base, pay an artist there. He can hire a civilian, which I can tell you right now, on this base, it won't happen. Or he can do without. And I think that's what they do. They do without. Although I noticed something on Facebook today. At Ellsworth, my last base, there was a poster like I used to make. I'm wondering how they had it made. Don't know. Just saw it and go, wow, I used to make those all the time. I wonder how they're making those, because there's no shop that does it.
It's interesting you mentioned graphic artists, and thinking back years ago that some of the old-time actors had gone to work at a studio as a graphic artist and became a big-time actor in the old westerns. With what you did, I don't think most people understand people like you behind the scenes. That is just as important, if not more important, when you start talking about years ago combat photographers. Somebody was out there putting their life on the line taking those pictures.
Yeah, if I remember right, there was a wall at the Combat Camera Association of 46 individuals that lost their lives taking photos and video in combat.
You betcha. Look what happened at the raising on Iwo Jima. The guy that took the photos is still over there in a cave, and the other fellow who did the backup got all the credit for it all these years.
Yeah, the second photo was more famous than the first.
and the Marine that had taken the original photos. But there's somebody out there doing that.
Right.
And when you think about the complexity of what you do that you took for granted every day, that you learned from scratch when you went in at 20 years old, not knowing what you were going to do.
That's right.
Look at the experiences you've had. I want to hear a price tag for that college education.
Well, I was told in 2005 when thinking about leaving the Air Force, because that's when I hit about the 20-year mark. And a guy in Las Vegas said, well, you can come to Las Vegas and get a 2-year degree, and it'll cost you about $32,000. But you know how to do it. The problem was he told me that I didn't have a degree. Mm-hmm. That's one regret I didn't do. The Air Force has a thing called the Community College of the Air Force. And I was, about 6 math credits and 2 elective credits shy of that. That I took some college courses and just didn't quite get it. I should have got it.
So if you had gone to college and you had learned a 2-year, 4-year film degree, USC, UCL, whatever, New York School of Fine Film, I would have to relate what you did, and the most important part of what you did was the practical application.
Right.
Because we've had people come out and work on films over the years, and 4-year film degree, and when they're first on a movie set, say, I didn't learn any of this in school.
Yeah, exactly.
So with your experience, you can't put a price on the practical application, the experiences, the people you met, the equipment you worked around, and people like you are behind the scenes, training film, training video, books. From the beginning of time, there was a graphic artist, there was an artist that was doing that work that we all take for granted.
If you ever watch the show NCIS, that's Navy Criminal Investigation Service. Well, I used to do work with the Air Force Office of Special Investigation.
Tell me about that.
Well, one time I had a guy come in. I didn't know he was a colonel. He was in civilian clothes. He asked me if I could take photos off of videotape. I said, sure. What do you need? Well, we got this photo of a friendly allied nation, and he explained to me it was Egypt. And we want this Beaufort gun recorded off here, and this, he pointed out these 3 things in a 30-minute clip. And I said, okay, I'll have it done for you tomorrow afternoon. So I stayed behind and I did it. Well, I started looking through the video tape and I found there was 4 locations he showed me he wanted off the videotape, but it was a minute and a half video. Well, I actually found 18 locations of the same thing. So then I started looking at it and I go, well, he told me that was a buffer gun, but that don't look like a buffer gun. So I had a Jane's Land Warfare Defense book right next there, and I started looking. Oh, that's not a buffer gun, that's an Okerlund. British made. And the missile batteries he identified as a Russian missile was actually our Hawk missile batteries. So I actually marked them down and made notes, and I recorded the 4 he wanted. Then I took all the other locations and made my own little file. And when he came in, I said, well, sir, here's your videotape back. Here's your 4. Here's the 14 you missed. And by the way, that's not an Okerlund. That's not a Bofor. That's this type of gun. That's a Hawk missile battery, and that's this type of radar. Well, how do you know that? And I just pulled out the Jane's book and put it there. And it's our job to pay attention.
Now, we talked about missile silos, and I'm not going to ask you anything. I'm not going to ask you anything that you can't talk about, because I know you've seen some things and done some things that you don't care to talk about. I know that.
Yes.
Okay. That you'd have to kill me if you told me about.
Yeah.
But that's okay. That's the other part of your job, is that you've seen and been involved in things and witnessed things that are basically mom.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned the SIS thing, like you see the pictures where they're going to the crime scene and they're taking pictures of the body or, whatever. Air Force photographers used to have to do that. And I'll never forget on my first base and I didn't get to go. I didn't go. I could have, because my roommate had to go over there. The NCOIC of photography's son committed suicide. An Air Force photographer had to go inside his boss's house, take pictures of the body before they moved it. That kind of stuff, people don't realize that, there's somebody doing it. And they think, well, it's just a picture. Well, yeah, it's more than just a picture. It's more to it. You have to, sometimes you have to put a ruler there so, okay, this is what we found. That kind of stuff, to document that stuff so the investigators can figure out what's going on. Same thing for aircraft damage. I'll never forget one morning I got called out, need a photographer. We'll call a photographer. Well, we can't get a hold of many of them. Okay, grab a camera. Where am I going? Well, we're taking out the flight line. Go out there and there's a B-1B bomber and there's a bomb door. Well, the bomb door looked like somebody took a tinfoil, took one of the bomb bay doors looked like somebody had just taken that one like this and went big hole in the side of it. So take pictures of that bomb bay door being broke. Well, what happened? Well, a bomb loader wasn't paying attention when he was loading bombs. Forgot to look up to see if the bomb bay door was closed when he pulled the bomb up to put it on the launcher. And he broke the door. You have to document that so they can find out who's responsible, mark out what the damage is, justify the replacement of the bomb bay door, that kind of stuff. And people don't realize, it's just a picture, but it has to be done right.
The hazards to prevent it, the documentation that has to be done. The years I spent around aircraft and training people in the civilian world, the time I spent on military bases, the thing I realized is, and I told people as I trained them, and I'm sure you ran into this, when you go onto an air base, not just a military reservation, but you go on an air base and you're around a flight line, I want to tell you about 10 ways you can get killed or maimed while you're out here.
Yep.
In a jet blast, get run over, stumble, get sucked up in the intake.
And, us as Air Force photographers, we used to get sent out there to take pictures. And it always used to be fun with the Air Force Security Forces, they're cops. And not supposed to take pictures out of the flight line. So they would confuse us with just an average Joe Blow out there with a camera. And one time at OSOT, I was told to go out there, take photos of a plane, and I had a cop come up there, well, I'm going to take your film. And this is back in the old film photography days. And I says, no, you're not taking my film. yes, we're going to take your film. And I was like, give me that camera. And it says, no, you're not taking a film. And if you do take that film, you're going to have to explain to the person who asked me to take this photo why. Well, who's that? Okay, General Fogelman. That kind of got him paused a little bit, and I brought out the work order. And 7th Air Force Commander wanted photos of a certain plane on the flight line. So what are you going to do? And, photography is not supposed to be taken out here. And I go, yeah, but Air Force photographers are authorized to take photos anywhere on the base. Go figure.
Well, this brings up another point, and that is there are people like you that many other people look at. Well, you're just a worker. You're a worker ant. You're what are you doing? I'm going to order you around. And a lot of times, the person you're talking to, like yourself, I'm sure we're working for people that knew people. And it would be wise that the folks talking to you stymie the conversation.
Well, I told you that story before we started this recording about how I was at Hill and I was working on 3 different projects at one time. Had a guy walk in with a suit. He was asking me questions. Well, I was kind of busy at the time. I was a one-man shop working on 3 video projects for video production and 1 graphic project to take down to a printing shop in Salt Lake City, 35 miles away, at a government printing office to put on the side of a van. And he was asking me questions. Well, I answered him, but I really wasn't paying too much attention to him because civilians are kind of common in the military, DOD civilians. That's what I thought he was. It wasn't until 2 hours later when I got back at Salt Lake and my supervisor walked in through the door and asked me if I knew how to talk to a 4-star admiral. I said, yeah, I do, if you point out a 4-star admiral to me. Well, that man you were talking to this morning was a commandant of the Coast Guard. Well, I didn't know that. He didn't identify himself. I didn't think about asking. So, that kind of stuff. You don't realize who you're talking to sometimes.
That's why, you have to use your brain once in a while. A friend of mine down in Nellis told me his son is a crew chief on the B-2. The 2 brothers and the father were retired Marines, recon Marines. They're Hawaiian, Samoan. And the one brother joined the Air Force. Ends up with the crew chief, the number 1 guy.
Right.
That's his airplane.
Oh, yeah.
They were on the flight line. And
they're married to their planes.
They were married to the aircraft, and they were on the flight line and had all the brass out on the flight line at Nellis a few years ago. And one of the officers came out in the blue and got a little smart with him about, well, I know your dad and your brothers, and talked to him like he was a low-level nobody, like he maybe was running chalks around on the flight line. And I said, well, how did you end up in the Air Force when you came out of a Marine family? I mean, who are you? What do you do out here? Not thinking. Now, here's an officer that needs to really go back and regroup. And he said, so what do you do out here? I mean, what's your job out here on the flight line? And he says, well, that's my airplane. And you will follow protocol or you won't be allowed to enter.
Yep.
And the guy shut up. Those things happen. There are a lot of people that don't run around with a flash and glitter like yourself that have a lot of knowledge, a lot of memories, a lot of information that you can't put a price on, that you take to your grave with you.
I mean, like I said, I used to work for Lieutenant General Ronald Fogelman. Now, he was a lieutenant general at the time.
Big time stuff.
He later became commander of the Air Mobility Command, which would amaze me because he was a fighter person. And then he later became the chief of staff of the Air Force. So I used to work directly for him. So when he became chief of staff of the Air Force, I was kind of impressed. And I was even more impressed with him when he resigned. If you remember back in history, Lieutenant Kelly Flynn was a B-52 pilot out of Malmstrom Air Force Base that kind of got caught. She disobeyed a direct order not to commit adultery. It made a big time news that, she claimed she's being discriminated against. And there was a couple of congressmen on her side. Well, General Fogelman went up there and testified about the whole issue. And he was ordered to treat her a little bit differently than other officers. General Fogelman instead announced his retirement and said, I won't do it. I respect that highly. He stuck to the guns and he stuck to the core values, and I used to work for him and I was happy about it.
Great memories.
Yeah.
Great memories. We mentioned earlier about the space shuttle and your experiences with the 747, the space shuttle, on top of it, landing, taking off, and share some
That was
thoughts.
the first flight after Discovery, after Challenger accident. Discovery went up 2 years later.
Well, we remember that, don't we?
Yeah, I remember. I was the Air Force had sent me to a word processing course at Texas A&M University to learn WordStar word processing course. And we went to it, me and a tech sergeant, and took the test. And we're waiting for our grades. The instructor turned on the TV, and lo and behold, there was no space shuttle. It kind of blew up. Then we were told to get back to the base. But
Watch that on TV, by the way.
yeah, I didn't get to see it until later, but 2 years later, Discovery went up. And it landed at Edwards Air Force Base out in California. Well, to get it back to Florida, they had to fly it. And they put it on top of a specially built 747. And they didn't mount it on there properly, so when we got to Kelly Air Force Base, we got called up and we had to go over there and take pictures of the damage. And they did a temporary repair at Kelly, and then they flew it back onto Florida. But we got called to go over there to take pictures because we had a photo lab on base, and Kelly Air Force Base didn't have one. And, you know, you had to deal with the people on the flight line. You had to deal with the safety officers. You had to deal with the maintenance people who were working on that. Then you had to deal with the NASA people. And that made it kind of interesting. You're working through 5 or 6 bureaucracies all at the same time. But we got the job done, took the pictures, and then I convinced the photographers that, you know, they wanted to go back to the base and go develop the film. I said, no, we got a couple more rolls of film. Let's go on the south end of the runway. When it takes off, we get some photos. And I got a series of photos of the space shuttle taking off. And I thought it was kind of neat. And when you see that thing fly, you kind of go, wow. You know, did I have anything to do with the space shot? No, but
Piggyback.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to do with the space shot, but it was kind of neat to have something to do with it going back.
I think we all remember the landings at Edwards and some of the backup fields for landing. Do you share that with us?
Yeah, Ellsworth Air Force Base is a B-1B base. It used to be an old B-52. It actually used to be an old B-47 base back in the day. When
Who remembers the B-47?
B-47 was a plane right after the B-29 that dropped the atomic bomb. They extended the runway out 3,000 feet, and I couldn't figure out why the runway was longer than it was when it had B-52s on it. And then it was explained to me that it was a backup base for the space shuttle. So if they didn't land at Edwards, and they had an emergency base at Mountain Home in Idaho.
Now, who knows that?
And if they couldn't fly to Mountain, if they couldn't land at Mountain Home, Ellsworth was the third alternate. It's kind of interesting, you know, information, but there's 2 squadrons of B-1s there, and that's who primarily uses the base.
Who would think Mountain Home? Idaho, for God's sake.
Idaho, yeah, well, if you've ever been out to Mountain Home, you'd understand. You go to Mountain Home, you have to drive about 15 miles south of Mountain Home just to get to the base. It's out in the middle of nowhere.
Well, I know exactly.
It's not like, you know, where I was based at Hill. Hill is right next to Ogden. I mean, the base was there before Riverdale ever built up next to it. And when I lived in Riverdale, when I was assigned there, a housing development went up right up to the gate, to the north gate. Well, that housing development was right under the the landing leg of the base. And then all of a sudden you had homeowners going to the mayor, you need to go tell the Air Force they got to quit flying their planes at night. And I used to like the mayor of Riverdale when he said, you know, that base was there before I was born. And it was there before I became mayor. I'm not telling the Air Force where to fly their planes. And you should have realized that before you built your house under a runway.
I heard
You
stories.
gotta love that. You know?
I heard stories about Nellis and developers and the way Las Vegas was growing, fastest growing city in the United States, and somebody wanted to buy Nellis or close Nellis down.
Close down was down,
And,
yeah.
and who knows, build condos, but beautiful housing down there. But you're familiar with Red Flag at Nellis?
Yes.
Share that with us.
Red Flag is where they do dissimilar combat training and basically create a country in the deserts of Nevada and have two opposing forces flying out of Nellis fight a war over it. And you got various Marine Corps, Army, Navy, Air Force. You might even have a foreign Air Force show up.
Oh yeah, adversary aircraft.
Fight it out over the air, and happens 3 times a year. Now, I never went down to Nellis for Red Flag to record it. But in between the Red Flags, they'd have a thing called an aerospace power demonstration. So we used to take a television van from Hill, go down to Nellis, set up cameras, and record the demonstrations. And that gets kind of interesting because you see planes from all over the Air Force. You know, like when I was there, we had B-52s from Barksdale, F-16s from Seymour Johnson. I think there was an A-10 group out of Pennsylvania. F-15s, they actually had F-15s. I was kind of surprised they brought them in from Japan. You know, flew them all the way across the Pacific just to be at Nellis to get combat training at Red Flag, or aerospace power. And I think they were telling us they were going to stay for Red Flag later on.
Well, all the Allied, a lot of course, adversary aircraft, and what a contingent of aircraft one sees down there.
Yeah.
I've seen the 135s, the KC-10s, the P-52s, the F-22 Raptors, and when you think how long some of those aircraft have been around.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, when I was leaving the Air Force, I was kind of amazed. I was on a B-1 base, and I used to have to do video teleconferencing. I ran that room.
There you go. We're back into what you did.
Yeah, and I had to learn that system. Well, one time they stuck me in the room with the air maintenance group commander, just me and him, a tech sergeant, a master sergeant, and a colonel. And I'm not an aircraft guy, but I'm sitting there in the room being quiet, listening to the video teleconference. He's talking to people at Langley Air Force Base, and they're talking about the B-1s. And well, there was a part on the B-1 for the rudder. And when the B-1 was put into service in the early 80s, there was a bunch of subcontractors who provide Rockwell the parts. Then they built the planes and put them out in the service. Well, Rockwell now, it's Boeing now who does the B-1 program. Rockwell got bought out and, various companies, and all the subcontractors have gone out of business. Well, they had these parts on the rudders needed repair. They're going to reverse engineer them. Well, Langley said, well, we're going to reverse engineer them, but we can't pay for them until 2014. This is in 2005 when they said it. And the colonel, he goes, can you mute this? And I go, yeah. So that way nobody can hear him talk. And he looked at me and goes, what did they just say? And I said, well, sir, they're going to reverse engineer the part, but they're not going to pay for it until 2014. When do you retire, Sir Martin? I go, well, probably 2 or 3 years, sir. Why? And he goes, I'm going to be retired by then too. So they're telling me I can't get my parts until well after I retire. And I go, I think that's what they said.
That sounds like Boeing.
It's just that kind of stuff. But now I was reading an article today in Aerospace Weekly, and I saw it on Facebook. They got a new technology now on the base that the maintenance troops can actually rebuild parts. So technology changes, but airframes age, if you know what I mean.
Airframes do age, yeah, and the maintenance is critical.
Remember there was a F-15 that went down in 2010 over Missouri. It was an Air National Guard plane. Well, they went over here to Portland and they examined all the planes, and they found out there was cracks in some of the behind some of the cockpits. They actually had to fix those planes because they're discovering that the age of the aircraft. So I always laugh when people tell me, well, we don't need an F-35 or we don't need the F-22. They cost too much. Eventually, you're going to need them because what you're flying now are actually going to wear out, just like an old car.
Sure. And the cost to retrofit, it's absolutely ridiculous. And the technology is outdated.
And when I came in, the F-106 Corvair Delta Dart was being pulled out of the Air National Guard Service. And 2 years after I got in, all of a sudden I started reading articles about how they would take and make remote control targets out of them. So some guy's sitting on the ground, remote control flying that plane, and some fighter pilots using it as a target and shooting it down. Then later on, all those went away, and they started doing that with the F-4 Phantoms. By the time I retired, those were running out. In fact, this year will be the last of the QF-4 Phantom targets. They're gone. No more.
So where do they go to?
F-16s. Early model F-16s, A models.
No T-38s.
Not yet. They haven't retired the T-38. They're going to have to, though.
It's a nice airplane.
I've been aboard one. No air conditioning.
Well, they're quite small. They are quite small. I'll tell you what I did. I had an opportunity years ago. I got a call at the Portland Airport. I'll make the story very, very quick. I got a call, and they said, "Do you have an Air Star unit?" I said, "I do." Take it to Salem, to the airport, the air show at Salem, Oregon. So I said, "I need police escort," which I never got.
Of course not.
Doesn't look like anything on the highway. I get down there, as I'm supposed to start an aircraft. And I'm saying this because I know in your heart and in your brain, you have memories that are priceless.
Oh, yeah.
I got down to the airport, and they pointed me to a white T-38 with a NASA sticker on the tail.
Yep.
I'm a young kid. Well, I'm 24 years old, 25 years old. I didn't think much of it. It took me years later to think about it. Introduced me to the pilot. So when you're ready to go, I'll get you hooked up. I'll get the truck running. Let me know when you get in the cockpit. And I knew all the procedures. Stand out, go start one, start two, stand by. We had our own signals with a standby and all that protocol. And I knew it. And it was such a feeling, and I know this feeling because I know you've had it, with the people you've met, the aircraft you've been on, and as you go through life, you go, wow, what an experience in a lifetime.
Oh, yeah.
You knew who that was? Didn't think much about it. Started it up, told him to stand by, took the chocks out, ready to go, brakes off. I stood out there, and I was a civilian, but I had the military experience and airline experience. And he rolled past me, and I saluted him. He saluted me, took off, came back across the airstrip, went straight up in the air and back to San Diego, and he flew about hour flight time. Neil Armstrong.
Oh, yeah.
Who cares? But I know you've had those experiences.
I didn't get to fly with him, but I got to follow him around and got to talk to him personally. Chuck Yeager.
The pioneers.
Yeah.
The people that came out of the Army Air Corps.
General Yeager. He's an interesting character, and the other one was former Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force, Richard Gaylor. And I got to meet him when he was much younger, back in 1987. And it just seemed like every base I went to, he came to the base.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's memories there.
Well, I could talk all night, and I would like to pick your brain for a while. I've got stories I'd love to hear from the Air Force, Army Air Corps, and all those pioneers we just got to touch on.
Yep.
But for everybody who's joined us for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress, we want to thank you for joining us from Metro East Community Media, wherever you are. And it's folk like this that make the world go around. I call the pioneers the blood, sweat, and tears that build America. And people like this gentleman right here, retired Master Sergeant Frank Martin. All the credit due, sir. It's a pleasure.
It was nice to talk to you.
Thank you.